Atmosphere. It's more than just a thin layer of mostly nitrogen separating us from the dark cold of space death. Atmosphere is an element of video games whose importance I don't think can ever really be overstated. One of the key appeals of gaming as a hobby is escaping into another world that has been created for you, whether that be the lush green fields of Hyrule, the dark grimy depths of SR38, or the dark grimy depths of New York City. You as the player expect to be transported to that place, to be immersed in that world, ideally. And the level of immersion you experience is largely determined by atmosphere. Remember from the beginning of the paragraph? Lighting, score, art direction, sound design. These are just a few of the many, many subtle aspects of game design that separate Yoshi's Island from Resident Evil 7. Just like any good film, the devs bring all of these elements together to meticulously craft the mood and tone of the piece of media that you're consuming. And for me, personally, there's only one game that comes to mind when I think of atmosphere, and that game is Sonic Lost World. It's Bioshock. I must have been like 12 or 13 when the first concept art and video reveals of Bioshock were made available. I think it was like 2004 or something. And this immediately became one of my first hype train games. I was sold on this game and I didn't know shit about it, like literally nothing. It's actually kind of funny. These early images and videos don't even show the game taking place underwater. No big daddies, no splicers. It's basically just a bunch of abandoned looking lab scenes and test tubes. On paper, this shit couldn't possibly have been more vague and generic, and yet the atmosphere that the team at Irrational were cultivating with this title was already oozing out of the screen, and it was enough to convince me and many others that what we were looking at here was going to be something special. And look at that! Guess we were fucking right, huh? I think it's so easy to take for granted the fact that Bioshock is considered one of like the greatest games of all time that it's equally easy to forget that this game almost didn't even happen. At the time of Bioshock's initial conception, director Ken Levine and Irrational Games were not exactly on top of the world. Levine created Irrational Games out of a bunch of fellow former members of Looking Glass Studios who had recently closed their doors due to the classic business mistake of not having any more money. So the first game Irrational puts out is System Shock 2, a sequel to Looking Glass's System Shock, and the game receives phenomenal critical acclaim, but itty bitty sales numbers. So when Ken Levine went knocking on EA's door asking them to publish a spiritual successor to System Shock 2, EA responded in no uncertain terms, sorry bro, but that game sold like balls. Go sniff a butt. And so Irrational would instead work on a handful of lower budget titles and some projects that were ultimately canceled. But the idea of a System Shock spiritual successor never left the back of Levine's mind. Basically what we had here was a Breaking Bad type situation where the team knew they had something great, but no publisher seemed to want to touch it. But then, when it seemed all hope was lost, just like AMC took a chance on Breaking Bad, 2K Games swoops in out of nowhere and agrees to publish the game. 2K was super duper interested in the core concept that Irrational had been pitching, that being the idea of three forces that the player would interact with, which they referred to as drones, protectors, and harvesters, all centered around a desired resource of some kind. Drones would house that resource, protectors would defend the drones, and harvesters would attack the drones to get to the resource. If this is starting to sound familiar, that's because this idea is obviously what would ultimately be fine-tuned into the game Katamari Damacy. 2K must have been really into this idea too, because when they agreed to publish the game, this concept was literally all Irrational had. Remember when I said those first looks at the game were super generic and vague? As it turns out, that's because Irrational had absolutely no idea what this game was going to be about. There was very clearly a Nintendo-esque focus on gameplay first when it came to Bioshock's development. The team had spent so much time and effort working out this central mechanic that smaller, less important details like, setting and narrative were put off until much later down the line. And when it came time to address these elements, Ken and the crew found themselves unsure of what story it was they wanted to tell. To their credit, they did a really good job exploring their options. The original idea for Bioshock had it taking place aboard a space station. The player would control Carlos Coelho, a professional deprogrammer, or someone who specializes in reversing brainwashing in victims of cults and stuff. The story would follow Carlos, who, hired by a senator, player would locate, rescue, and deprogram a certain target. And then the team said, wait, fuck that. Now, the game was going to take place in an abandoned Nazi laboratory recently unearthed by modern-day scientists. Facing off against horrific genetic experiments and mutations, the player would navigate this mutated ecosystem left unchecked over the decades but then the team said, wait, fuck that. Now, honestly, I would be stoked to play either one of these games, and this was the reject pile, okay? It really goes to show how dedicated Irrational were to crafting a narrative that fit the gameplay like a glove. They weren't just going to come up with a good story. It had to be a good story that both elevated and was elevated by their central mechanic. And after a trip to New York's Rockefeller Center, Ken Levine finally figured out what story it was he wanted to tell. Levine was fascinated by the Art Deco style of Rockefeller Center and noted that it was an aesthetic he hadn't really seen much of in the shooter genre. He was intrigued by Rockefeller himself as well, and the story of him building the structure against all odds during the Great Depression. He had also been reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged at the time, and found the absurd philosophy of objectivism to be the perfect motivational framework for a potential antagonist. To put it super simple for the sake of time, objectivists believe that I don't owe you shit, and you don't owe me shit. It's a philosophy based entirely on the idea that mankind would be much better off driven by selfishness as opposed to empathy. We call this the billionaire philosophy. And I'm sorry, I just gotta go on a little bit of a tangent here. I read Atlas Shrugged. This shit is so stupid. There's this part in the book where she arrives at this hidden society of where all the billionaires of the world have retreated to and set up their own society. And she sees the tilled fields and the windmill working, and she's how did they pull this off? How did they manage this? And they're just what do you mean? They're this is society's best. These are the pinnacles of mankind. What do you don't think they could figure out how to till fields? And I'm just yeah, oh fucking K, dude. Go grab Elon Musk and ask him to till a field and build a windmill. I fucking dare you. Anyway, with this strange combination of inspiration, the character of Andrew Ryan was conceptualized, and the world of Bioshock finally began to take shape. So the team settled on the idea of this guy creating his idea of a utopia, a world of capitalism and industry at its most base, free from things like government regulation, religious interference, or, basic morality, a laissez-faire wet dream of unchecked business practices and not paying taxes. But the only question was, where was he gonna put it? There's a cool set of interviews on the remastered edition of the game where Jeff Keighley's talking to Ken Levine and animation director Sean Robertson. And Ken mentions how one of the things that always broke his immersion the most in games was being able to see a place and not being able to go there. He felt things like invisible walls or text boxes saying you can't proceed any farther were really distracting, and took him out of the experience pretty heavily. So the question for him became, how do you create a place that feels huge and boundless while actually being pretty contained and structured? And the answer to that question was coincidentally the same answer to the question of what is the most overrated Disney song ever produced. That being, of course, Under the Sea. It really is still to this day a very clever solution. You're shown this huge, massive city under the ocean. Neon signs, advertisements, shops, bars. This sets up in your head the scope of where you are. That first reveal shot of Rapture you get in the bathysphere never leaves your mind for the rest of the game. That is where you are. And even though you can never freely roam this city like it's Breath of the Wild or something, in fact the places you are allowed to go are very linear and scripted, but it never feels that way because every limitation, every roadblock is so believably woven into the environment. Look at this door. Think I could go that way? I don't need a block of text telling me I can't go this way, okay? And you know what? Of course this door is being pummeled by crazy amounts of pressure and flooding water preventing my access to it. We are in an underwater city that is actively falling apart. This makes sense, and it all makes sense. And that's why this setting was such a stroke of genius. It was the perfect answer to Levine's immersion problem, and is to this day such a huge factor as to why Rapture remains one of the most compelling, immersive locations in video game history. And this This level of immersive finesse isn't just applied to the setting either. These crazy bastards went so hard on making this world feel real. Everything is explained, like to an absurd degree. The plasmids you use to melt splicers' faces off are shown their practical uses in old advertisements to the public before everything went to shit. Look, you can light a cigarette with your thumb. Even how the player is able to keep coming back to life after they die is mentioned in-game. It turns out that the Vita Chambers are some kind of genetic preservation product Ryan was working on, and they only work for his DNA signature. That's why you're able to keep coming back swinging even after that spider splicer just stuck its hook up your ass. Like, what? Fuck you, they didn't have to do this? It's insane. Even something as simple as, this being a video game, and obviously you can just try again over and over, isn't taken for granted. No, here's why you can keep trying again over and over. They wanted so badly for players to just be able to lose themselves in this game, and through all of this painstaking effort and attention to detail, Ken and the Irrational team just made it so easy to do so. And the coolest part is that it is completely up to you how deep you want to dive into Rapture, and that is the kind of pun you're only gonna get on a channel like Stony RPG, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. Most of these little quips and details and lore dumps can be passed right on by if the player isn't paying attention. Hidden audio logs, propaganda posters, and graffiti, skeletons lying in such a way that make you stop and go, wait a minute. I love this kind of environmental storytelling. I love when a game manages to satisfyingly reward a player for their curiosity. And holy shit, like 90% of Bioshock's narrative is hidden between the lines. There were audio logs and little details and Easter eggs I found for the first time on this playthrough, okay? I've been playing this game for 17 years. Bioshock has so much story to tell, so much lore and history to sink your teeth into, and it somehow manages to convey all of it in a game with like 1 or 2 actual cutscenes. This decision to give the player the agency to engage with the world as much or as little as they wanted to was another move the devs made that just made Rapture feel that much more layered and complex. This entire game is basically on rails, and yet this freedom the player has to seek more and more information about this world that they're exploring goes such a long way in making Rapture feel expansive and fleshed out. And in terms of immersion, it's an absolute— But how does it play, Stony? Shut the fuck up about immersion and get to the gameplay. Bioshock is up there with like Halo 1 in terms of defining FPS experiences for me. I had never played anything like this game at the time. The controls were buttery smooth. I felt like I was fucking pirouetting Jack through Rapture, doing a fucking triple sow cow into an alley-oop just to wrench this dude in the brain. Mwah! Beautiful. The actual shooting itself is good. Really good. Halo good? No. But all the guns feel good enough to use. There's a satisfying amount of kick to the shotgun, which incidentally is how I judge all of my first-person shooters, but the real selling point of this combat system is the sheer amount of options it gives to the player to just obliterate enemies. The combination of plasmid power in one hand and your weapon in the other was a stroke of genius. Jesus Christ. There are so many ways to kill shit in this game. You can shock people to stun them, then shoot him in the face with a revolver. You can set this dude on fire, change your mind, flash freeze him, and then shatter him into 1,000 pieces. You can set explosive traps with a crossbow. You can make friends with a big daddy, tell him that guy took your lunch money, and watch as he does all the work. You can kill this guy, pick up his dead body, and throw it at his friend. You can use bees. Bees is a weapon in this game. There are so many customization options. You can upgrade every single weapon to improve things like damage output and ammo capacity, even unique upgrades for each weapon like reduced bolt breakage for the crossbow. Each weapon has like 3 different ammo types that have varying effectiveness against different enemies. Stronger versions of your plasmids can be bought with Adam at the little sister machines. There are so many of these gene tonics that improve Jack in a variety of ways. There are combat tonics, there are engineering tonics, there are physical tonics, which I thought were the same thing as combat tonics, but I guess not. And each tonic category has like this many tonics, and it's actually a little overwhelming. This is a little much, guys. I'm not gonna sit here and shit on Irrational for putting in as many options as possible, but I will say that at least some of this shit could have been left on the cutting room floor. Like I said, for a really long time, I didn't even know that there was a physical tonic subcategory, like across multiple playthroughs, and I feel like a lot of the tonics in general are a little superfluous superfluous, like borderline redundant. Like look at this, alarm expert. 2 fewer alarm tiles while hacking, that's solid. But also like security expert, safecracker, hacking expert, also all remove alarm tiles while hacking their respective machine types, and also have a bunch of other helpful benefits as well. So honestly, how necessary is alarm expert? And this might be a hot take, I don't know, but honestly, I feel like they could have nixed the different ammo types too. Like you'd think that it'd be cool having anti-personnel machine gun rounds for splicers and armor-piercing rounds for big daddies, but to be real with you guys, and again, this might just be me, but there were several times where I would leave it on like armor piercing by accident for like hours, and I would never notice the difference. And did we really need electrified shotgun shells? Like, come on now. At this point in the game, we literally have 3 other options for electricity damage. Boom, boom, boom. Did we really have to toss electrified shotgun shells onto the menu? It's just funny, man. I'm not pissed about this stuff being in here or anything. It can just make the game feel a little bloated sometimes, you know? What does piss me off though is the horrendously implemented morality system. Like, oh my god. Has anything else in the world ever screamed half-ass slapped on at the last minute more than this? If you're gonna have me choose between saving these girls and harvesting the sea slugs in their stomachs, at least make it a question worth asking. Oh my god. You get so much more and better shit for saving the girls. Like, it's not even a question. You have absolutely no reason to not do the good thing. Like, if you're murdering these girls in this game, it is purely because you are a piece of shit, because you are actively choosing the least beneficial route for yourself. In my opinion, the only real morality situation is when you get to choose whether or not to kill Sander Cohen. And even that's watered down by the fact that he just tried to kill you like 5 minutes earlier, so it's like, yeah, why wouldn't I kill this guy? And that way I get his key to open his big magic box full of weird shit. But I'm just nitpicking now. And bear in mind, these are the nittiest of nitpicks I could pick from the nit, okay? I had to dig for these criticisms, just to make sure I didn't turn this video into a straight love letter. I can't just gush about the great stuff. What would that do to my credibility? Answer, what credibility? Ha! Self-burn. And yes, the hacking sucks butts, everybody knows it. It's the most tedious, awful part of the entire experience. It's been talked to death. So I wasn't going to devote a lot of time to it here. Until I realized it was the perfect excuse to launch my new segment! Stony the Shitty Mechanic. Hey, I'm Brooklyn Stony with a Brooklyn accent. Welcome to the Stony the Shitty Mechanic, where I take your shitty game mechanics, fix them up for you right here, good as new, 5 minutes or less. So today what we got in the garage, I'm not gonna do the voice the whole time. Bioshock's hacking. Alright, you can fix this in 2 easy steps. Step 1, take that grid, make it like half the size, maybe less. Make every hackable device's grid like the size of those small grids you get when you're hacking safes sometimes. These grids are obnoxiously large, and their size adds no meaningful challenge to the minigame beyond wasting time. It is artificially inflated difficulty at its worst, because it doesn't even succeed at that. Navigating this goo isn't harder because the space I'm navigating it across is larger, it's just more tedious and time consuming. Odds are you figured out what you had to do 30 seconds ago, and now you're just grabbing the right pieces and building your tube across the vast expanse of the hacking grid. And this wouldn't even be an issue if hacking was an every once in a while thing, but you will be hacking all the time, especially if you're looking for secrets and hidden areas. So by cutting that grid in half, maybe increasing the goo's average speed to compensate, you maintain the same level of complexity while cutting out a lot of that unnecessary time consumption. Okay, step 2, take out the entire tile flipping aspect. This is pointless, this is stupid. Another part of the minigame designed specifically to eat away at your time. All this adds is an element of luck to the equation that nobody asked for. This is a thinking puzzle meant for solving. Who the fuck thought it was a good idea to bring RNG into the equation? Oh, you had the puzzle completely solved but didn't flip the last piece you needed in time? Sorry, dumbass, back to the beginning. Oh, and we're also gonna take some of your health because fuck you. So there you have it, Ken. You just had a couple of leaks in the time department. Once we got rid of those, hacking became a quicker, much more concise process that the player can do multiple times without wanting to burn themselves with matches. That'll be $1,200. If nothing else has convinced you that this game is fantastic, the fact that the worst criticism I have is that the hacking minigame could be a bit shorter should definitely tell you something. Bioshock is one of those rare projects where every single one of its elements came together so perfectly, it's almost unbelievable. And it really comes down to Irrational's uncompromising vision. Once they knew what they wanted this game to be, they weren't going to let it be anything less than that. Their drone protector harvester concept could not have been better realized. The big daddies and little sisters have become so iconic, so synonymous with Bioshock itself, that even if you've never played this game, there's still a very good chance you recognize this image. And of course, the coup de grace, the magnum opus, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Worldwide, the motherfucking story. Wow! Never has a story so thoroughly made me go, man, fuck that lame mutant Nazi lab bullshit, am I right? When Teen Stoney played this game, he felt like he had his brain removed, flossed with spearmint-flavored betrayal, and tossed into a trash can labeled subverted expectations only, please. This is one of those games where if you ever found a genie and got 3 wishes, you would absolutely use one of those wishes to forget the plot of Bioshock so you could play it for the first time again. And yet it also manages to be so fucking replayable. Like, how the hell did they pull this off? I feel weird saying spoiler alert for a 17-year-old game, but on the off chance that you are the last person on the planet unaware of the ending of Bioshock and you know, care, please feel free to skip to the timestamp on the screen because I'm just gonna gush a little bit here, alright? Here we go. Holy fucking shit, Atlas is Fontaine? He's supposed to be dead, I trusted. What the fuck do you mean Ryan's my dad? I just clubbed him in the brain. What the fuck? Oh my god, I'm that baby? I'm like 2.5 years old. I was smoking a cigarette in the opening cutscene. God damn, you know that meme where Gunna's like writing bars and the paper just like bursts into flames? That's these guys writing Bioshock. It's like they brought M. Night Shyamalan into the writer's room just for that twist and then, you know, kicked him out before he could do any real damage. I am so impressed with Irrational and their absolute refusal to compromise on this project. So many times they could have just given up. So many times they could have settled for an inferior product or idea. And yet they stuck to their vision, much like Andrew Ryan themselves. They kind of built Rapture against all odds, you know? And what an amazing world they've put together here. When I return to Rapture, it's not to re-experience its plot. It's not to mess around with the plasmids. Those are just the bonuses. I return to Rapture simply to experience Rapture. This game is an absolute treat to just exist in. It's a setting so dense, so meticulously crafted to immerse the player, and it's a level of atmosphere I have yet to see successfully recreated in any other game I have experienced before or since. Bioshock is one of those once-in-a-lifetime games, one of the few I would happily give that masterpiece moniker to. It is a gold standard of game design and a monument to everything that makes this industry so exciting and so interesting in the first place. If you haven't played Bioshock yet, fuck you. 10 out of 10. I'm not even gonna use a funny unit of measurement this time. And now, if you'll all excuse me, I have a bathysphere to catch. I'll see you guys next time.
Beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sand.
I'm joking. There's no bathysphere. The video's just over.